What's going on, everybody? Matt here again from East Coast Sabres, and I'm coming at you today with yet another new product review, this being the Roman Props Graflex Generation 2. This has been a long time coming. He has been, when I say he, I mean Roman himself, has been talking about the massive improvements made to his Graflex replica. And today I have it in hand. We're going to go over it inside and out. We're going to go over the good, the bad. For any of you that have not seen my reviews, I do very impartial reviews. I go over strictly my opinions, the things I do like, things I don't like. I do have a completely untouched, unconverted vintage Graflex here to compare it to. So we'll go over the differences, the similarities, the good, the bad. We'll talk about everything. And this might be a long one because I'm actually going to take the whole thing apart as well. And we're going to see together if the Solos Hold blade holder fits in this new replica, because it did not in the Generation 1. The blade holder, the sink holes, well, I should say the blade holder would work. The sink pin holes, which I will show you in a moment, did not line up with the shroud on the Romans Gen 1. So hopefully with this new Gen 2 it works, because the Solos Hold blade holder, in my personal opinion, is the best one on the market. It's the most accurate, and it really gives you that 7/8 inch original trilogy authenticity. So without putting it off any longer, let's just jump right into looking at the hilt itself and seeing what changes have been made from the Generation 1. So first off, you're going to have your brown shipper box that we always get. The 2.0s and the Romans all seem to come in the same box. So you just open that up, and unlike the 2.0, obviously, you know, we don't have any other, whoops, I knocked something over. We don't have anything else in the box. So we can just toss that aside. And we have our wrapping paper and our bubble bag. And here we have the hilt itself. Now, I have taken an in-depth look at this already. I have taken this all apart, so I already know what to expect. But overall, this is the Roman Props Graflex Generation 2. Now, this is going to be an in-depth review, but I also want to make it as quick as possible, quick and painless as possible. So let's just jump right into what we have here. Like all my Graflex reviews, I like to start at the emitter and work my way down to the pommel. So we'll do that now. And as I said, I do have an unconverted original Graflex. This is a Graflex Ink version, patented. So I'm not exactly sure excuse me, what the manufacturing dates on this particular version were. It does have the stepped pins, but this is what we will be referencing, considering that the Roman Props is the most identical to a vintage, meaning that the Roman Props is a functional flash gun. You can stick some 3 D-cell batteries in here and it will light up. The test bulb underneath the glass eye will light up. You can slap this onto a vintage camera, sync it up, and it will work just like the vintage one. So in that respect, this is the most accurate replica on the market right now, because nobody else makes one that is an actual functioning flash gun. So we'll just set this vintage aside for just right now, and we'll go start at the top and work our way down. The overall finish of the hilt has, I think, improved. It's difficult to pick up on camera because my lighting is not the best. I just have an overhead LED light. But the finish itself is definitely more chrome than the previous one, and it is a brush chrome, which I recently meaning quite a few months ago, I guess, discovered that the vintages were actually brushed chrome. I always believed that they were a nickel-plated, brushed nickel-plated, but they're actually a chrome. And this one itself does appear more chrome. It doesn't have any discoloration or anything like that. It is definitely brushed, and I really like it. Vintages do vary with the amount of chrominess, I guess is the word we can use here. Some are more chrome than others. This one seems to be right in that balance of nice and chrome and also very brushed. So I personally like the finish on it. But starting at the emitter, we'll talk about the emitter shape. The S curve is more accurate than a 2.0, meaning, and the problem with the 2.0 has always been that this first curve here is not deep enough. It's a very shallow curve. If you look at the curve on a vintage, you can see that this first corner comes down just a little bit further than on the Romans, but the Romans is definitely an improvement from a 2.0. So it's still not 100% perfect, but it is definitely better. The bunny ears themselves have been modified since the Generation 1. They are shorter. They are actually vintage length accurate. Again, if we line this up, which is hard to do and keep it on camera, you can see that the bunny ears are the proper length. They might actually be a tad. Are they a tad shorter? No, I think it's just a trick of the light and the way that I'm holding it. I'll have to measure that, but either way, they are definitely shorter than the Generation 1 was, and they are far more accurate than they used to be, so that is definitely a good thing. The bunny ears are still held in place with the Allen screw, which I prefer over the rivet style that the vintages have, just because the rivet's a pain in the ass to get out. You risk damaging things. It never goes back in the same way. It's never as tight. I don't care for it. I do wish that this was a smooth head screw, much like the TGS does, and that you can buy aftermarket. But the fact that it is a screw, I do like better than being a rivet. I would suggest upgrading, sourcing a flathead if you want more accuracy to a vintage. But the screw itself is a nice touch. It just makes it so much easier to work on than the rivet. The red button is still the same. It's still a red button, functional. The red color, I think, is slightly off from a vintage. Yeah, Romans on the left, vintage on the right. You can see that the Romans is just slightly more purplish. Not really a big deal. I'm not really worried about that at all. But as I said, I do very impartial reviews. I go over every tiny detail, and the color is not 100% perfect, but it's nothing to be concerned about. Moving down, the raised area around the red button has been improved from the Generation 1. It is actually a circular raise, whereas the Generation 1 was more oval. It protruded more to the sides, and that is inaccurate. The vintages have a round raised area around the button, which is far more accurate on this one. So I really like that, and the same thing with around the glass eye. It's a circular raised section. So that is a nice improvement. That's a nice subtle touch. I really like that. Moving down, the beer tab and the slide switch plate are actually the correct dull metal. I don't know exactly what material they're made out of. I'm not even exactly sure what they were on a vintage. I know they can rust, so I don't think the vintages had stainless, but they are a much duller material. As you can see, here's the vintage. They're just a dull metal, and every replica we've seen up to this point, 2.0s, the Roman Gen 1, even some of the first generation Graflex shop replicas, they all had shiny, very, very shiny beer tabs and slide switch plates. And this is the first one to come with both of them being pretty damn near the perfect consistency of dull, flat gray. And I really, really like that. That is a very welcomed change. Because in my mind, for me personally, those are two very distinct things that a vintage has that I really like the look of, is the difference in materials and the difference in colors. And the fact that this one now has that is a huge improvement. And I love that. Moving on, we have the bulb pin socket, which actually does feel a little tighter. The original Gen 1 seemed kind of loose. This one seems accurate to a vintage. Well, the vintage actually is a little looser, and this one's actually a little bit tighter. That could just be from use. It could be from, this one is, you gotta remember, this one's 60 to 70 years old. And a lot of people see the vintages as silver, but it's actually a layer of patina. I have heard that there were production changes over the years, and some of them are actually steel. All of the ones that I've had, all the ones that I've cleaned up, they are brass underneath. If you hit them with a wire wheel from a Dremel, it brings the brass right back, and they look great. So the fact that the new Roman props comes brass, I love the look of it. I think it goes much better with the sink pins, and for my personal experience, it is more accurate. I have yet to find a vintage that actually has a steel pin. So the fact that these ones are brass, and they're good quality brass as well, is just another improvement that this version has made that I'm a big fan of. The sink tabs themselves are smooth, early Fulmer pins. They don't have the step, which again I'm also a fan of. I just like the look of the smooth pins better. It doesn't really make a difference as far as functionality at all. It's a matter of preference. I like the smooth pins, and you'll see in a moment why the smooth pins were a good choice. We have the accurate emitter screw, and because this is a functional piece, it's difficult to see, but there are the actual electrical contacts down inside the holes that you can modify when installing a different blade holder for the most amount of accuracy. The glass eye is standard glass eye. Nothing wrong with that. It does have the bulb inside of it as well. It does come with a bulb, but there are no problems with the glass eye, no changes there. Moving down, we have the clamp. Now the clamp is a good quality clamp. I don't see any major problems with it. It is very clean, I can say that there are no, I cannot remember for the life of me if the Roman props had the same issue as the 2.0s did with stains around the clamps. I do know that this one is very clean. It's very chrome, but it is a brushed chrome except for the areas up by the clamp braces where it gets tight in there. It is still pretty chrome, but if you were to take the clamp apart, just hit it very lightly with some Scotch-Brite, a red Scotch-Brite pad, it will dull it up and it'll look perfect. So that's not really anything I'm worried about. The Graflex stamping is nice and deep, and as the last one was, it is actually painted, which there are vintages that do have paint in the clamps. I was incorrect in my review of the Gen 1, where I said vintages don't usually have paint in the clamp. That is 100% false. They do, and this one actually has it. Oftentimes the paint wears off, but this one is actually painted. So the stamping for the lettering on the Roman props is actually very well done. It's very clean. There's a little bit of extra paint around the edges of the letters, but I think just a little bit of acetone or rubbing alcohol will pick that right up and it'll look a lot better. I know right now the lettering seems very wide, and that's just because there is extra paint. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. You can see there is a little bit of extra paint on the surface around the lettering, but as I said, just a little bit of acetone should take that right up and it won't be a problem. But the stamping itself for the lettering looks very good. The lines around the clamp are still the etched or scribed lines. I'm not exactly sure of the process used for putting the lines on. They look good. They're nice and even. They're nice and deep. They're nice and clean. I don't have a problem with them. My only gripe about it is that on a vintage, they are stamped. And as you can see, stamping results in a much cleaner line. You don't get the jaggedness inside the line itself. They're just much smoother, much nicer, and much more even. That being said, these ones, like I said, they're not bad. They look very good, and it's difficult to pick up on camera, but if it'll focus, there we go. You can see just a little bit of roughness inside the line, in the groove of the line itself. I do think it is much better quality than the Gen 1 lines, because there were some that were very thin and didn't look that great, so they definitely are improved from the Gen 1. I just do wish that the lines were stamped along with the lettering, but that's more my personal preference. If you get a Roman Props Graflex clamp that he sells individually, if you get the satin ones, which I believe he does sell on his website, I don't think they're out of stock right now, they do have stamped lines. So if you were incredibly finicky and picky, you can upgrade the clamp to one of his other ones that does have stamped lines, and you'll be good to go. So it's not even an issue. The quality of the clamp, though, is very well done. The clamp lever itself is sturdy. The clamp braces, I don't see any major problems with those. Everything seems well done. The stamping around the clamp itself is off. It is not accurate to a vintage. As you can see here, I'll try to show you what I'm talking about here. The edge of the G, the straight edge of the G, should line up almost perfectly with the inside edge of these square holes here. It should line up pretty much perfectly. And very few replicas have ever been able to get this identical. And honestly, it's not really something that we want identical, because then it makes it incredibly hard to tell a vintage from a replica. Whereas you can see on this one, if it'll focus again, the G is well within the line of that square. So it's definitely not accurate to a vintage. If you were to put a straight line going from this square down to this square, the G would fall well inside that line. Same with the X. The X is well within that square, whereas on a vintage, the X also lines up directly with the edge of the square holes. But the stamping itself is very well done, so I don't have any problems with that. I don't really care about that, because again, people can try to sell these, they can try to weather them, they can try to do all kinds of things, and they can try and sell them off on eBay for ridiculous amounts of money, claiming that they're vintages. And luckily, people such as myself and many other people on the internet can look at this, and it's a clear tell to tell us that it's not a vintage. So overall, the clamp is very nice. Like I said, my only teeny tiny little gripe is the fact that the lines are etched and not stamped. But if you don't like that, like I said, you can just get a different clamp from Roman. You can get one of his individual satin clamps, and it'll fix the non-issue. It's not even an issue. It's just a matter of personal preference. But the finish on the clamp is just very nice overall. The finish on the lower matches the upper very nicely, and that was something that I did notice on the Gen 1, was that the upper and lower had slightly different finishes to them, like they were not plated excuse me, at the same time, which I was not a fan of. It looked kind of odd, but this one, as you can see, it looks perfect from top to bottom, and even the clamp has the same finish on it, so it just looks very nice all the way around. Moving down to the end, we've finally come to the end of the overall hilt. We have the pommel, and the stamping on the pommel is very nice. It's very clean. The pommel itself is actually, it does actually come brushed. I remember that one of the big issues with the Gen 1 was that they were a mirror polish. They were so chrome and so polished. These ones do come pre-brushed, so that is that's a very nice touch. The stamping is clean. See if I can get that to focus on a little better. There we go. The stamping is very clean. We do have a non-patent Fulmer stamp, which is nice. A couple tells to tell that it's not a vintage is that the lettering is more towards the center of the pommel. If we look at a vintage, now keep in mind that these are different stamps. The vintage is a patented Graflex ink. This is a non-patent Fulmer. But you can see that the ring of text around the edge is more concentrated towards the center on the Romans, whereas the vintage is more to the outside. And the vintage is more even more of a fine stamp, but that can fluctuate from vintage to vintage. Some are more fine, some are a little softer, I guess you could say. So the text being more closer to the center is one tell if you see them online on eBay and things like that. Another is the trademark registered patent office. Is if you look, the text is very close together, which is indicative of a replica. Most vintages, they're more spaced out, but you have trademark RE patent office, or PATOFF, but the RE is not supposed to be there. That is a sign. My camera is doing very odd colors all of a sudden. I'm not sure why. But the RE in the stamping stands for Roman Empire. That is not present on a vintage stamp. I'm not sure if this one will have the same. It does have the same stamp. So as you can see, on the vintage, you have trademark REGUS PATOFF. There is no RE crammed in the middle of it. And the RE, as I said, stands for Roman Empire. So that is another huge tell for if you see these pop up on eBay or anything claiming to be a vintage. If it has the RE in that line, it is 100% not vintage, and you should not be spending hundreds of dollars on it, especially when you can get these from Roman himself for either $195 or just a little over $200. I don't remember the exact price. I don't remember what I paid for this one. I pre-ordered it a while ago, and I don't remember the exact price. But it's certainly cheaper than what vintages are going for on eBay right now. So just keep in mind the RE. But overall, the stamping is very nice. It is the early Fulmer non-patent, which I like. And if we undo the clamp here and remove this and flip it 180 degrees, and properly install it. And you line up, the clamp is already aligned, but if you align that, and if we can get that to focus, we have our Rochester, New York stamp. And as you can see, if we had a Pommel, a Cobalt D-ring, Cobalt D-ring mount on the bottom, it would line up with the clamp right about there, and you have your new showing. So that is fairly accurate for the Wampa Cave in Empire Strikes Back. I think it's down a little more. I think ideally it should be up a little bit like that, so you can still see the ER in Rochester and the new for New York. I think that's a little more accurate, but the fact that we do have Wampa Cave stamping is awesome, and that's the reason why a lot of people want these non-patent Fulmers, is so that they can get the proper stamping as seen in the Wampa Cave in Empire Strikes Back. And it being the non-patent Fulmer is again why it has these smooth pins, so the stamping and the pins now match, and that is a very nice touch that I really like. It's attention to detail, having the correct pins with the correct stamping. That's a small detail that I really appreciate. And overall, aesthetically, the hilt is very, very nice. Now, the only real gripe I have with the outside of the hilt is the emitter cut. If you look at a vintage, now I'm not talking about the shape of the emitter, which we already said on the Romans is just very slightly still off. If you look at the cut, the way that the metal is cut on the vintage, you look at this edge right here. It's very smooth, it's very even. There are a few nicks in it that could just be from age, but all the way around, it's very, very nice. And if you look at the Roman props, unfortunately, we don't have that. We have, and it's difficult to pick up on camera because it's reflecting all of the light, we have these ridges all the way around the cut. We have them on both sides. If you run your fingernail over them, you can actually feel them. Now again, this is a very small detail. It's not going to change the functionality of this at all. It's not going to change anything. It's just a little detail that I wish had been polished a little more at the factory. It's just, I don't know, it's one of those things that kind of, it's a pet peeve of mine. You may be somebody that really does not care about a tiny detail like that. But like I said, for the sake of the review, I have to go over the good and the bad. And for me, that's just, it's just a lack of attention to detail, where they got so many things right on this one and they made so many improvements. The fact that the emitter is just so jagged and so not smooth, basically, is just a little disappointing. But that's really my only real gripe with it, besides the clamp lines, which, like I said, are not a big deal at all. That's really the only problem I have with it, and it's really not even a problem in itself. It's more a matter of personal preference. So take that for what it is. It's not going to stop the hilt from functioning. It's not going to change the look of anything, and most of the time, you know, you're never going to see it. If you're wielding it, if you're doing anything, if it's hanging on your belt, nobody's ever going to notice it. The only person that's going to notice it is you, if you care about that little tiny detail. I do wish it was smooth, and I do wish there was a way for us to sand it, but if you started sanding it, the plating would come off, and it wouldn't really work to try and sand it or modify it yourself. So it's just a shame that this otherwise great piece is taken down just like a notch, half a notch, by a detail like that. But overall, the outside of this hilt is a vast improvement from the Gen 1. The tiny details like the bunny ears, the brass bulb socket, the flat beer tab, and slide plate screw, the better quality clamp, the accurate and matching finishes, the brush stamping with the Wampa Cave stamping. Overall, the outside of the hilt is just, it's beautiful. It's incredibly well done. It has its tells to be able to tell us that it is a replica, but they're very subtle tells, so it's nothing to be concerned about in any way. And overall, it's just very, very well done. Roman definitely took some of the constructive criticism that we had of the first iteration, and he definitely improved them in this one, which is what we as people purchasing the product, customers, I should say, that's the word I was trying to think of. As customers, that's the attention to detail that we like to see, that when you do make a product and it's not up to par, you do take the constructive criticism as constructive criticism and you do make improvements to make it better. And that is what has been done here, and I absolutely love the changes that have been made. This is now a great replica. If I could change anything, it would be that the emitter shape be brought down a little more, especially on this first curve, to perfectly match a vintage. I would smooth up these jagged edges, and I would stamp the lines on the clamp. Other than that, other than those three minor things, everything about this replica is spot on, and the fact that it is a functioning flash handle that can be bolted up to a camera is absolutely incredible. So overall, I'm very happy with the way that this one came out, and kudos to Roman for making the improvements he did and making this one even better than the last one. I think there are still, like I said, there's just a few little tweaks that could be made to make it, without a doubt, the best replica we have. But for right now, it is definitely very well done, and it is a solid improvement from the Generation 1. The real decision maker will be whether or not it can use other people's blade holders other than just the Roman blade holders, because as I said on the Generation 1, this hole here, and well, both of these were not accurate to a vintage. They weren't spaced properly, so that when you tried to use a blade holder such as the Solo's Hold blade holder, it did not line up perfectly with the hole in the shroud. So it just looked off. You could use it, it wouldn't look quite right. Your only options were either the blade holder from Roman, which did not have the accurate lip, I don't believe, in the front, which most people that are making blade holders nowadays, that's something that we as consumers, as customers, really like to see, is the accurate lip on the front. I don't believe Roman's had that, but KR Sabers did release a 1-inch version of his blade holder that was specifically designed for the Roman Gen 1. So we're going to take this apart, and we're going to see if the Solo's Hold blade holder actually fits, because if it does, that will take this replica to another entirely new level. So let's get into how to disassemble this, and we'll see if it fits. Okay, so now let's get into disassembling the Roman Props flash gun, and we will talk about the steps it takes to take this thing apart and to convert it to a functioning lightsaber. And basically that's just a matter of installing the blade holder, and that is going to be today. I have a Solo's Hold 2-piece blade holder. It is my personal preference for the Graflex replicas because it has the 7/8 inch bore, which I personally like over a 1-inch, especially for Empire Strikes Back or A New Hope. If you're going for The Force Awakens or Last Jedi, they are more of a robust blade in the movies, so you could probably get away with 1-inch. But today we're going to be using the Solo's Hold. So right off the bat, what you're going to need is a pin tool. I use the one from the Graflex shop. You can also use a ink cartridge out of a standard pen, you just kind of cut a piece off the back of the ink cartridge, heat it up with a heat gun, slide it over the pins, wait for it to cool. The plastic will harden in the shape of the pins. It works great. Or you can spend the I think it was $10 or $15 on the tool from TGS, or you can get a tool from a multi kit from like Walmart or something like that. And you're going to need a screwdriver. I just have a small pocket screwdriver here, flat blade screwdriver, and you're going to need a 1/16 inch Allen key. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're just going to open this up, remove the lower half, and we'll set that aside because we're not going to need it. I'm going to remove this screw. If my camera would focus just once. I'm trying to do this through the camera, so it's difficult. So we're going to just remove this clamp screw. And we're going to set that off to the side. Now you have to be careful because inside here is the retaining nut. You can see it right there through the clamp. So we can actually open this clamp up and we can go ahead and remove this. Now as you can see, the retaining nut does fit down inside the slot. So when you remove the clamp, it will push the nut right out of the way. And you can just go ahead and remove that. Put that out to the side too. Now you don't have to reinstall that when you put the saber back together. I don't know if any on-screen hilts had the clamp screw. I usually omit it. I don't usually put it back in. So as you can see now, we have our bulb contact assembly up in the upper half. So we can just start taking this apart. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take off the glass eye, which does have the spring in it. And the bulb will slide right out. Okay. Now we can remove our red button as well. Now I've already had this all apart, and I greased the threads on the red button and the glass eye because they are very stiff and very tight from the factory. So I put some white lithium grease on the threads to free them up, and I recommend that you do the same. I do wish that they grease them from the factory, but it is what it is. You can slide the beer tab out of the way. Actually, you don't even need to. That's not a big deal. Next thing, we can remove the screw holding the bunny ears in. It is a 1/16 inch Allen. And the screw seems to be of good quality. It doesn't seem to have stripped out or be faulty in any way. Then we just push down on the bunny ears and they'll slide right out. They may be in there pretty well, pretty stiff. And then you just kind of like pinch the ears to get them past the ear hole. And there you have the bunny ears. So then we shall remove the emitter screw using a flat blade screwdriver. It is a short one, so be careful you don't drop it. And pretty much the last thing we need to do is remove our sync pins. And be careful when you remove the rear ones on both the sides and the top one, because in the hole is this tiny little spring. And that is necessary if you wish to use this as a functioning flash handle. You need to make sure that those springs are still installed because they reach in and contact metal, a piece on the inside, and it's used for conductivity. So they are necessary. So if you take this apart and you put it back together and you're missing those, it may not function. So be sure to keep those in a safe place. Now the pins are all, well, I'll take this one out first before I show you that, but the pins on the Roman props are all, like I said, the smooth style early Fulmer, but they are all brass with the hex. All 6 of them have the hex, whereas if we look at a vintage, as you can see, these ones, these sync pins, are a hex. These ones are actually stepped because this is a later model. If we move the red button, you can see that the ones under the red button are actually square. But on the Romans, they're all the hex, and it really makes no difference at all. In fact, that's actually a good thing, because if you happen to lose one of the ones off the sides, you have a couple backups. So now that we have all of that removed, the bulb assembly can actually come right out. Now this one is newer, being a replica, so it should slide right out. There will be a little bit of force, but for the most part it should come right out. If it's a vintage, many times you have to really use force to get them out, and for that I use just a punch, just a sturdy solid punch, and I put it in against not one of the metal pieces on the inside, just against one of the plastic pieces, and I will just push down on the hilt, and that will capture, or release I should say, the bulb assembly. Now you have this piece here that goes all the way up into underneath the red button, is held in place with one of the pins, and then when this pulp falls off or comes out, you will have your strip for the sync pins, and you will have your bulb assembly, and you will have this metal contact, which will be loose and it will fall out, and you have your retention nut, which will also be loose and will fall out. So when you pound this out of the shell, make sure that nothing goes flying, make sure you don't lose anything. These pieces here are also just held in with springs, and they have a tendency to go flying as well, more so on a vintage when the springs are all worn out and collapsed, but right now these are all nice and tight. So that is the completed vintage style bulb assembly, which is actually 100% accurate to a vintage, and it's very nice quality actually. So here we have our empty shell, and the installation of the blade holder is very simple. You have your upper piece, which just slides right in, and you need to make sure the bunny ears are removed for this. Don't go putting the bunny ears back in, because this top piece, due to the fact that it has the accurate lip on the front of it, it obviously can't go in from the back side. It has to go in from the front, and it can't do that with the bunny ears in place. So we're just going to slide that in and line up the screw hole like so. And when you do this, especially with the Solos Hold one, I'm not sure if the KR can use vintage pieces or not, but on the Solos Hold one, you will reuse this little metal tab here, the one that fell out, and you will use another one that is, I don't know if you can see it, there's another piece of metal down inside here that when you disassemble this whole contact assembly, you can take it out, and you will need to trim both of them, and even just maybe add just a dab of glue, and they'll go in these little squares, and it just adds to the realism and it makes it look so much better. I'm not going to worry about that right now, because all we're really worried about is testing to make sure that the sync pin holes line up. So then you're going to want to take your short screw, or short emitter screw, carefully put that in place. And like I said, it is short, so it does like to wander around a little bit. But just get it in there. There we go. And just get it tightened down. Okay, so now the real test is to see if that lines up. And it does. It lines up very, very well. It's difficult to see. Let me try getting a different light. Swap hands here. As you can see, the edges of the blade holder line up perfectly with the holes in the shroud itself, and they line up on both sides, and that is a very, very nice fit. And that is what we wanted to see, because that guarantees that we can use the solus hole blade holder with the Gen 2, which was a huge limitation to the Gen 1, was the limit of what we can do blade holder wise. So the fact that we can use the solus hold, and pretty much anybody's, if it works on a vintage, it will work on this. So that is awesome. I'm not going to install the rear section at this time, because we know that if the front lines up, then the rear will line up. It's not a problem, because they're two halves of the same circle. And also, in order to install this lower piece, we need to modify that arm in here. We need to trim that much shorter so that it rides within this wire channel. So it needs to be that short. And I'm not going to do that at this time, because there are other plans for this hilt, and I don't want to go modifying that right now, because once I do that, there's no way to undo it without replacing the whole slide switch assembly, and I don't feel like doing that right now. So I know for a fact that because the front half lines up, that the rear half will line up as well. So that is very, very good. I really like the fact that that lines up. So, that being the case, I think we can go ahead and give this replica a final verdict. And overall, being that the blade holder fits, the corrections that have been made to this updated version, I really, really like it. Like I said, there are still a few things that I wish would change, maybe for the Generation 3, that would make it absolutely perfect. That being again, the shape of the emitter, which on this is better than a 2.0, but it's still not 100% what a vintage is. And I really love the shape of the vintage emitter. So it's kind of more personal preference for me at that point. It is close, but it's not 100% perfect. I would like to see that exaggerated just a little bit more, but it's not terrible. The lines, the jaggedness on the edge of the emitter itself are not that great. I wish it was smooth. It would just take a couple minutes of sanding during the production process, but like I said, that's another small detail. And the clamp lines, I do wish the clamp lines were stamped rather than etched, but they are a very nice etched. They are very smooth, they are very even, they're nice, they're fairly deep. So even that isn't a huge, you know, it's none of my personal gripes with this replica are anything serious. It's not mismatched plating, it's not specifications being off in any way. The improvements that have been made far outweigh the problems problems, I should say. They're not really problems, they're just personal preference at this point as to what it should be. The fact that this is a functional flash handle and is as accurate as it is amazing. And the fact that we have access to it and they're readily available, they're shipping now, is awesome. So with the things that I do like about it are the shorter bunny ears, the brass bulb contact is something that I really, really like. The fact that it looks to be a better quality as well from the steel ones that the Roman's Gen 1 came with. I really like the look of that brass. It's well done. The different type of metal used on the side switch and the beer tab are huge improvements for me. and that really takes it to that next level of accuracy, and I love that. The fact that the raised sections around the red button and glass eye are now actual circular rather than oval, that's a huge improvement. The overall finish of it being matched to the lower, that's a huge improvement. The quality of the clamp is better than the last ones were. And like I said, if you don't like the little bit of extra chrominess and shininess, you can just easily take a Scotch-Brite pad and buff that up a little bit. But the stamping is nice, and it's not 100% accurate to a vintage, so it is easy to tell that it's a replica, while still having the accurate font. It is a nice tell to be able to tell that it's not a vintage. So if you see one online and it doesn't line up perfectly, then you know not to spend $900 or whatever the current market value of of vintages go for. So overall, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10 because I'm really happy with the changes that were made, and I don't really like to say the word gripe, but the inconsistencies between this and a vintage are minimal, and they're nothing to write home about, I guess you could say. I'm very happy with this replica, and the fact that it does use the blade holder is just incredible. The fact that they took the time to change the tooling to make these blade holders fit, and pretty much everybody's blade holder, because before with the Gen 1, Roman had to design his own for it. KR Sabers designed one specifically for it, but now that we can use any other blade holder that fits a vintage is a perfect step in the right direction, and all the other changes were great. So overall, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. To reach a 10 in my mind, like I said, would just be the emitter shape, the roughness on the emitter, and maybe even the stamped lines on the clamp instead of etched. But other than those three things, I can't find any faults or any flaws with this replica. It's a solid piece. It's well worth the money, whether you are looking to build a saber, whether you want it functional, or you just want a belt hanger, or whether you're a camera enthusiast who wants a functioning flash without paying the outrageous eBay prices right now. This is a solid option. So I highly recommend it. They're available on Roman's website, and they may even be available at the Custom Saber Shop later on down the road, just like the Gen 1 was. But for now, that's all I've got, folks. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you.